Hey guys, as I promised, here's the first video of this new wave of videos that I'm gonna make for you guys. I've been away for a while, but now I have the intention of coming back with some new series for different languages, especially Portuguese. I had a special request for Portuguese lessons, and we're gonna start. So, um, before we get into the language, I think it is important for us to have a little overview of the influence of Portuguese and where it stands compared to other languages. For those that are starting right now, or for you that just stumble upon this video and maybe lost in the sauce. Okay, so this is the first video of a series of Portuguese for English speakers, and we're going to start with a quick overview. So Portuguese is part of the Romance group of languages, where you can find French, Italian, Spanish, Romanian, Catalan, and a few other languages that are not as spread around the world as French, Italian, and Spanish. Um, they have a direct connection to Latin. So you're gonna see a lot of the same roots, a lot of the same influences from Latin, and they do help each other. There's a very curious fact about Portuguese, which is if you learn Portuguese, you should be able to understand Spanish pretty well. When you learn Spanish, it is harder for you to understand Portuguese. Don't ask me why, I don't know. And the last time I asked the professor why Portuguese was more advanced than Spanish, I got chewed out. So there's no language that is more advanced than others. They are all equal on their own natures. They are all special, and let's leave it at that. But um, Spanish and Portuguese, they come from the same region, the Iberian Peninsula, where Portugal and Spain are, right? Just north of Africa, west, the west coast of, well, the west edge of Europe. There's no east coast of Europe, right? It goes into Asia. But you have Portuguese at the edge, and then you have Spanish in Spain moving inland. Of course, Spain still has coast, and they were navigators just like Portuguese, French, and the British centuries ago. Because of all these connections, their language, both languages, got influenced in different ways. Portuguese got influenced with a lot of African languages, especially because of the unfortunate slave trade from Africa to not only to Europe, but especially to Brazil. So with the large colony of Africans being taken to Brazil, the Portuguese that is spoken in Brazil is highly influenced by African languages, especially Yoruba, and by local languages from Brazil like the Tupi and Guarani. So you're gonna find words in Brazilian Portuguese that you cannot find in Portugal Portuguese. For example, the word for fern, the plant fern, in Portugal is called fetus. It's a fetus, right? Because of the shape of it. And in Brazil, it's called samambaia, which is a Tupi Guarani word. And you're gonna find many of those, especially for plants and animals because of the Amazon jungle. Surprise, surprise, right? Okay. There's also a big influence of Arabic into Portuguese and Spanish, more than French, and even more than Italian, even way more than Romanian. Also, another curiosity: those that speak Romanian generally can understand Portuguese speakers. We have no idea what they are talking about. And if you don't know, I'm originally from Brazil, so I'm a native speaker of Portuguese. I cannot understand Romanian, enough to make sense of anything. There's a word here and there. If I put some effort, I can understand a little bit, but not enough to even a survival level. Romanian has been influenced by Slavic languages because of its position and the influence of the Soviet Union a long time ago. Let's not get into the politics because we're already getting into the geography. Okay, so going back to Portuguese. So if you learn Portuguese, you should be able to understand a good deal of Spanish and a little French, some Italian, not so much Romanian. But as the line progresses, you should be able to get a better grasp of the other languages once you have assimilated Portuguese or Portuguese is Spanish, or Spanish will help you with Portuguese. So your knowledge of Spanish, if you have any, or your knowledge of French or Italian, should help you with Portuguese. Possibly your knowledge of Romanian may help with some vocabulary in Portuguese, but since I don't know a whole lot of Romanian, I'll keep my mouth shut. I'm not gonna promise you something that's not real. But I can promise you one thing. Once you learn the basics for Portuguese, you will be able to understand some Spanish. And once you get to an intermediate level in Portuguese, all three main Romance languages, Italian, French, and Spanish, will become very familiar, especially the written part. And Latin is going to start to make more sense for those that know a little bit of Latin, and the transition will help. Latin helps with a lot of languages, especially when you're doing like specialized vocabulary, like for medical, legal. There's a big influence of Latin in those terms, right? Okay, so you may not know, but there are 8 countries that speak Portuguese in the world. So it's Brazil, Portugal, East Timor, Angola, Mozambique, Macau, and did I say Angola? I'm failing on the last one. You can Google that. But just so you know, there are more countries that speak Portuguese, right? Other than Portugal and Brazil. And you're gonna notice that each one of those countries will have a different influence, right? There's even a language called Patois, which is a mix of Cantonese and Portuguese, which it's kind of hard to think about it, but hey, it exists, so it's out there. When you're studying Portuguese, I think it is important for you to decide which dialect you're going to study, Brazilian or Portuguese. So you have Brazilian Portuguese and Portuguese from Portugal, right? Literary vocabulary is basically the same, especially because most of the classical works of Portuguese literature come from Portugal. As you progress through the years, like if you go, instead of 100 years ago, you go to 50 years ago, then there are Brazilian authors that publish masterpieces. We have Paulo Coelho, which is known worldwide, and he is Brazilian. He published in Brazilian Portuguese. So you don't need to read Camões. I have a video where I'm reading a piece of a work by Camões, and the language is very different. It's like Shakespearean English, so it's very hard to understand. Okay, so once you make that decision, Brazilian Portuguese or Portugal Portuguese, then you have to try to get the material for that region. Like if you're gonna listen to the radios, you're gonna pull out the radios from Portugal or Brazil. To try to learn both at the same time may be a little confusing because some of the pronunciations are different. For example, the letter S in Brazil is just S, like in let me think, especially at the end of a word. So for example, lápis. Lápis is pencil, right? Normal pronunciation, lápis. In Portugal, it would be more like lápis. So the S, the final S in Portugal is more like a sh sound. So it's just slightly different. The R's are different as well, but according to linguistic research, in Brazil there are 7 different types of R's, or 7 different ways of pronouncing the letter R. I think I've heard like 4 or 5. Don't get entangled on that. That's not really relevant for your studies, okay? But in Portugal is different. The letter R pronounced in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil is closer, probably just like the one from Portugal. But there are different combinations of pronunciations in this 2 specific letters, and there are 1 or 2 grammar rules that are different from Brazil to Portugal. For example, the gerund, which is a verbal tense that shows a present progressive, in action that is happening right now. So for example, I am speaking, right? That's the gerund. In English, is marked by ing. In Brazil, we say, we use NDO. Eu estou falando. I am speaking. So the NDO at the end, falando, determines the gerund, right? In Portuguese, that is not used. They would say, estou a falar. Basically, I am at speaking, which is understandable by Brazilian Portuguese speakers, but not used. Definitely not used. It is kind of easier for me to imitate their accent because my family is from Portugal. So my grandfather had a very thick Portuguese accent, although he was born in Brazil, but he was heavily involved with the Portuguese community in São Paulo. So he had a thick accent, Portuguese accent. My dad, although he doesn't have a Portuguese accent, he makes fun of Portuguese speakers. So he would imitate that accent all the time. So I was able to pick up some from him. So there's always a joke from Brazilians towards Portuguese for a series of reasons. We're not gonna get there right now. This is about language, not culture, although I'm explaining the culture too, but I don't want to take much of the time, all the time with the culture. Okay, so in Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, let's get into some basic things. And on those basic things, I'm going to explain some rules for pronunciation, which will determine how gringo you're going to sound in Portuguese. Okay, so right off the bat, the first thing you say in the morning, bom dia. Sounds simple, very short, very tricky. Okay, so let's start with bom. Bom means good, right? So, good day, bom dia. When you pronounce bom, first, no Portuguese words end in N, in the letter N. All of them will end in the letter M. If they do end in the letter N, is because they are foreign. They're either French or English or who knows, but they are not Portuguese. Okay, so bom. In English, when we pronounce the letter M, we close our mouths at the end of the letter. So it would be bom, right? When you finish with the letter N, is a N. So none, or sun. The tongue goes up and touches right behind your teeth, right? Like right in the back of your teeth. touch there, it makes the N sound. With the letter M, you close your mouth and there's a puff of air. M, M. In Portuguese, neither of them exist. It is a the puff of air that comes out when the letter M is pronounced is divided between the mouth, which remains open, and your nose. So it is a nasal sound. So it may sound very foreign, but if you think of the word none, none, you can feel in your nose some air coming out. So you're gonna say bom. Look at my mouth. Bom. It never closes. So it's not bom, neither bon. It's bom. Bom. If I plug my nose, the sound is very different. Bom. There's no passage of air, so the sound is different. So bom, bom. That's very tricky. Very tricky. It's very hard for English speakers to acquire that pronunciation. So it requires a lot of training, especially hearing and trying to pronounce. Hearing, trying to pronounce, not just trying to pronounce because you're gonna fool your brain into believing you're doing it right, but it's not quite right. So, bom, bom. Okay, keep in mind, if your mouth closed, if your tongue touched anywhere on the upper part of your mouth, it is wrong. The second word, dia. Okay, if I ask you to spell this word right now, I promise you, you're gonna write a different word from the other person watching this video, and that will be probably like 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 different ways of spelling that according to English spelling or some other languages. So think about this. Gia. There's no J there. It's just D-I-A. But when you have the combination of D and I, you don't say D, you say G. Don't ask me why. I do not have that answer, but it happens. So if you say bom dia, you sound like from a very specific region of Brazil or from Portugal. In Brazilian Portuguese, which is what I'm going to be teaching here, is dia. Okay? So remember, if there's a D and an I, it's going to be G. If there's a D and an E, and if it's not accented, is also G. I'm gonna explain that better later, but right now let's just focus on bom dia. Bom dia. Bom. 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 Doesn't close, right? Bom dia. Dia. Bom dia. So bom dia is good morning, right? Good day. Okay, let's move on. How you greet somebody. Officially, there are 2 ways. You can say oi or olá. I don't remember ever using olá. Most people will use oi, and they will reply with oi. It's very informal, but people don't care anymore. So in the past, they would even refer to people as senhor, Mr., and senhora, Mrs., but that's long gone. It's antiquated. They don't use it anymore. So they would use você. Sometimes when it's a very elderly person or somebody on a higher position, you can say senhor, senhora, but in the daily conversations, it's almost not used. Okay, so how do you say hi? Oi. Oi. British people generally say that to call somebody's attention. Same thing. Oi. Like that one, the main character of the series Lie to Me, he uses oi all the time. It's the same pronunciation as in Portuguese. Oi. So oi, bom dia. We continue on the day. Boa tarde. Think about this. Boa tarde. Boa is the feminine version of bom. So you have bom, boa, bom dia. There's a rule for the words. Most words that end in A are feminine. Dia is an exception, and I know everybody hates exceptions when it comes to learning languages. I do too, especially because English has more exceptions than rules. But there are like a handful of words in Portuguese that end in A, but they are masculine. Dia and profeta, which means prophet, are two examples of those. But the others are rarer to appear. Those are the two common ones. So, bom dia, boa tarde. Tarde is feminine and ends in E. Now think about this. Boa tarde, B-O-A, boa. Tarde, T-A-R-D-E. Remember, D and E unstressed sound like G. So, tarde, tarde, no, tarde, tarde. Because of that rule, D and E, you're gonna say G. So, boa tarde. Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite. And here comes another pronunciation, different pronunciation rule. Boa noite. Noite means night, so good night. Or good evening. In Portuguese, you can use for both. But there's another rule. A T and an I has a chi sound, not a T. No T is chi. And just like the D, I, and D, E, T, I also have the same rule. So, sorry, T, I, and T, E. Noite is spelled N-O-I-T-E, but it's pronounced noite because it's noite. It's unstressed. The E becomes an I. I don't want you to get wind up on these rules. I just want you to listen to them and try to internalize a little bit. I will explain again later, and we'll take it from there. So now we have oi, bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite. Some greetings. And I think that will be it for now. I don't want to make this lesson super long. So we had the introduction to the culture, linguistic culture of the Portuguese language, some geographical, for lack of a better word, in details, some historical linguistics explanation of the relationship between Portuguese and the other Romance languages, and a couple expressions so you can start using. And then we're gonna dive into more expressions and grammar. And yes, I do explain grammar. I know that there's a lot of people out there saying, oh, don't explain grammar, blah, 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 blah. Don't study grammar. I like grammar. I know that some of you like grammar. I'm gonna explain grammar. If you can't understand, send me a message. I'll explain. And as I promised, since you held together until now in the video, I'm gonna post this today. It's Monday. On Saturday, I'm gonna take all the names of those that left a comment in this video, and I'm gonna draw one name out of it, and this person's gonna have full access to a free lesson or explanation or tutoring for learning languages whenever they want. So make a comment, like the video, and on Saturday I'll draw one of the names to have a free full hour of language support for whatever language you want, however you want, whenever you want. Okay? I hope you guys enjoy this. Welcome to this Portuguese language series, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.